Hello. On Waste Watch this week, we're going to be looking at one government department. It's a department that costs us £6.5 billion a year and employs 10,000 civil servants. And yet most people have only got the faintest idea what it does. And people that have looked carefully at it have inevitably come to a conclusion that it should be abolished. It's the Department of Trade and Industry, which is the building behind me. And as an experiment, in the 5 minutes or so we've got for Waste Watch, I'm going to attempt to walk around the entire circumference of that huge structure. Let's see how I get on. Well, I've got my city walking boots on, so let's give it a go.
So what do they actually spend the money on? Well, as always, it's rather difficult to find out. But we do know that in 2005 they spent £30,000 of our money on renaming themselves. They decided they were fed up being called the boring old DTI and would like to be known henceforth as the Department for Productivity, Energy and Industry. It was only after they put up the new nameplate that somebody pointed out that it spelled Dippy and quite possibly stood for Department of Penis. The new plates were taken down. What that story highlights is that the DTI really doesn't have a clue what it's trying to achieve. In fact, it gets so confused it has to put up posters in its front window to remind itself what its jobs are. Its responsibilities are a classic ragbag, shot through with contradictions and conflicts. For example, it's supposed to promote the interests of industry, and yet at the same time it's responsible for policing and implementing labour legislation such as the minimum wage and promoting the interests of consumers through organs such as the National Consumer Council. In fact, far from being a support for industry, it's a huge burden to large parts of industry. On its own admission, its regulatory burden costs industry £5.3 billion per annum, and the true figure is undoubtedly a multiple of that. But still, £6.5 billion is a lot of money. Where does it go? Well, £2 billion a year goes to the regional development agencies. These are super quangos dotted around all over England with names like One North East and Advantage West Midlands that spend a very great deal of our money supposedly trying to stimulate the local economies in depressed areas. Well, except for the fact that it isn't just in depressed areas. The southeast of England, one of the most prosperous areas in the whole of the world, also has a regional development agency. And even if we just consider the economically depressed areas of England, there is absolutely no solid economic evidence that this kind of government intervention actually creates sustainable growth and employment. It is money down the drain. So how are we doing on the circumnavigation of DTI towers? Not too well by the look of it. He's going to have to speed up. Faster! Faster! Another £2.5 billion a year goes to the research councils who fund academic research of various kinds. Well, quite right too, you say. Britain needs a strong science base, except for two things. First of all, much of the money doesn't go to science at all, but goes to research in the humanities. And second, there is absolutely no evidence that Britain gets any economic return from all this academic funding. Indeed, a recent study by a British academic said that we could save at least £1 billion a year from that total without suffering any ill effects whatsoever. When Labour came to power, they set the DTI one major objective, quote, to raise the rate of productivity growth, improving competitiveness, and narrowing the gap with our major industrial competitors. So how's it done? Here's an analysis produced by the chief economist at the OECD. Look at the three bars. The first represents our labour productivity growth in the first half of the 90s. The second, the blue bar, represents our productivity growth in the second half of the 90s. And the third, the red bar, shows the first half of the noughties. The horizontal black line shows the average productivity growth over the 25-year period from 1980 to 2004. As you can see, despite all the talk and all the money we're spending on the DTI, it has been downhill all the way. Meanwhile, we've made it. Just.
The Department of Trade and Industry is a complete and utter waste of £6.5 billion a year, which is the equivalent of 2p on the standard rate of income tax. The sooner it's abolished, the sooner we start saving that money.